Good afternoon, and thank you for attending this latest CumbriaMed Research Webinar. I'm Professor Jonathan Weaver. I'm co-director of the Research Hub here at the Piers Cumbria School of Medicine, based in Carlisle, with my colleague and co-director, Professor Sophie Day. So the purpose of these research webinars that we run from PCSM is to showcase research and clinical care from the new Piers Cumbria School of Medicine and from our partner organisations at the University of Cumbria, at Imperial College London, and with our key NHS partners across Cumbria, in particularly North Cumbria Integrated Care Trust, NCIC, and University Hospitals Morecambe Bay, UHMB. So the webinars aim to bring together sort of cutting-edge research with clinical presentations from PCSM partners. And in the webinar today, we'll be focusing on bioengineering and giving you both an application of bioengineering locally from Harry Tustin and a broad view of bioelectronics and the extraordinary developments in bioengineering in healthcare from Professor Rylie Green at Imperial. Thanks, Hugh. So if I can turn to our first speaker, Mr. Harry Tustin. Harry is a consultant ear, nose and throat surgeon at North Cumbria Integrated Care NHS Trust, and whose work embraces 3D printed models of the temporal bone to support the planar complex ear surgery. And he'll be talking about that and other conditions related to hearing and the application of bioengineering. So Harry, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Let me just share my screen. So thanks for the intro, Jonathan. And I just sort of say a few words about my move to Cumbria, which happened just under 2 years ago, and is something I've really been planning and aspiring to do for many years throughout my training as a ENT surgeon in the northeast and North Cumbria. And I've come here because it's a fantastic place to live, as you can see from these pictures. I really do have a brilliant time, but also because I think we can set up really nationally excellent services for ENT surgery here, and I believe we've taken great strides in that direction, and also that we can develop the medical devices, and something I hope to be involved in throughout my career is developing medical devices that transform the way we treat diseases in ENT and in surgery more widely, and particularly relating to hearing loss and chronic ear disease. So what I'm going to really talk about is my experience with design innovation in surgery, which is something I've been involved in ever since I qualified as a doctor. And I'd like to talk about some of my failures, my false starts, and devices that I've developed that haven't gone the distance, and the things I've learned from them, because that's been really important in shaping my journey as a designer. And I'm going to talk about a more successful project, which is a bone conduction hearing device called Secure Sound, and a project relating to 3D printed models for surgical planning in major ear surgery. But let me start with these false journeys or more important journeys that I've had along the way. And this is something I developed at my very first year as a junior doctor. This is a little magnetic clip that goes on the ear after someone's had an injury, causing a blood clot to accumulate under the skin. That's why rugby players get cauliflower ears, because these little blood clots. And conceptually, really simple. Magnets compress the ear after you've drained the clot away, and it doesn't come back again. And I think this is something that would absolutely have worked. And then I tried very hard to develop it as a device to be used in practice. And the simple arithmetic was that not enough people have this problem for anyone to ever invest in developing a device to solve it. So moved on. And the next device was this. This is a way to generate movement for a robot that works like muscles in the human body. And the real advantage that potentially brings is that a robot is able to feel the environment it moves against. And when you're operating with your hands, you're constantly feeling that environment and determining if something feels soft like healthy tissue or hard like a cancer or bone. This was something that it worked, but it didn't work well enough. And in reality, I think physics and modern material technology was against me. And the lesson here was probably stick to your areas of real expertise, because your invention needs to work well enough in practice to work in the world. And this was something I developed as an early years surgical trainee, which I think again was highly feasible and likely to be successful. And what it is a little splinting system that corrects malformed ears in newborn babies. It wouldn't work in an older child or an adult, but in a newborn baby, if the ear's abnormally folded, you can fix that just by splinting it into the right shape. And uh, and the problem here was that this is an area where a number of companies have already developed a product. I don't think what they developed was quite as good, but I think introducing a further product into a crowded and relatively small market wasn't really going to generate it wasn't a robust enough business model to get the investment and interest in developing this into a successful medical device. With each of these devices, I learned a huge amount about how you design something that works, about intellectual property management, about approaching manufacturers, about designing validation studies. So it wasn't wasted time. And it really was a journey that's taken me to where I am now. So the most recent device, which has been far more successful and we're expecting to see on the market by the end of this year, is something called a secure sound bone conduction hearing device. I'll go into a bit more detail about what it is. This is what it looks like, a relatively simple thing. But before I really talk about it, I actually want to talk about the problem it's solving, because that's much more important. The first thing you need is a problem that is worth solving. And that problem here is what is called conductive hearing loss. And that's when the inner ear is working perfectly well. The sensing cells in the inner ear are working normally. The nerves that transmit electric signals from the inner ear to the brain are working normally. But for whatever reason, the eardrum and the hearing bones behind it aren't doing the job of getting vibrations to those sensing cells in the inner ear. It's got a conductive hearing loss. And reasons you can have that, really common reasons that I see every day, are something called glue ear. That top picture where there's bubbles behind an eardrum, there's fluid behind this person's eardrum, so it's not going to move normally when sound hits it. And the other one I see and treat every week is chronic ear disease, which is that horrid-looking eardrum, the bottom there, where there is actually unhealthy disease and chronically infected and expanding skin, destroying the structures behind that eardrum and damaging sound conduction through to the inner ear. And treatment we offer, and we now offer here in Cumbria for that, is something called a bone conduction hearing implant, where you attach a vibrating hearing aid to the bone of the skull with a small titanium screw. There's some other ways of doing it, but essentially you're vibrating the bone of the skull directly, and that vibrates the inner ear directly and bypasses the damage to the eardrum and hearing bones. The problem is that if you have a temporary conductive hearing loss, which is very, very, very common in children, or if you're in a poor country where an implant is simply unaffordable, the non-implanted bone conduction hearing aid solutions are, really, in a word, they're rubbish at the moment. What's available? So the picture on the left there is a headband, and if you ask people who work with children with deafness a lot, I'm sure what you'll hear is kids don't want to wear them. They're uncomfortable. They slip off, or the kids take them off. And the partial headbands similarly really difficult to fit and uncomfortable to wear. And actually, the initial inspiration for this project was when my own boy Arthur was around 4 years old. He had some glue ear, and his behaviour changed completely, became very withdrawn. He wasn't communicating and interacting in the same way. And I had a soft bands with a bone conduction aid at home. I put it on him, and his behaviour transformed instantly. He was back in the room and engaging with us. And then within a couple of hours, it was uncomfortable, and it was back on the floor, and he wasn't hearing again. And I thought there's got to be a better way, which is why I've come up with this secure sound device, and the real tagline is that you're producing bone conduction hearing without an implant in a way that is an unobtrusive, easy to use, convenient and comfortable. And I'm wearing it now, if you can see me on the image. And I can show you at the end as well. It's something that generally, unless someone's standing behind you or just off to the side, it's very, very hard indeed to notice that someone's wearing it. What it is a simple mechanism that holds a bone conduction hearing aid firmly onto the bone behind the ear, but it works without depending on the stiffness of the ear. It's a counterbalance mechanism that pushes an area directly in front of the ear to provide a counterbalance force to the pressure applied by the bone conduction hearing aid behind the ear. And we've tested this, and we've tested it against other non-implanted solutions, and it performs as well or better in terms of sound conduction. With this project, I think with any research that you do beyond your day job as a clinician, it's got to be driven by your own natural passion and the thing that you want to spend your time doing. And this is really in equal parts wanting to develop something that makes a difference to patients I see every day, and really a real enjoyment of doing design work. So that ranges from computer-aided design to hand building the early prototypes to 3D printing, and I was lucky to get a large grant from the British Society of Otology and from British Association of Paediatric Otolaryngology for a medical grade 3D printer that's been used for now nearly 30 prototyping cycles, and in fact we've locked the design for mass production now. And the next step was finding a commercial partner, and there's a lot I can talk about around this, including intellectual property and having a strategy for that works, and that's essential. And also the way you approach manufacturers and ascertain who's most appropriate, and the regulatory bar for entry to market as well for medical devices, and whether you can design your way into a lower regulatory category, which allows you to get a product to patients much, much more quickly. But we found a commercial partner. That's the crucial thing. And that's a company called Medel, who are a multinational manufacturer of hearing implants, and working with a company they own called BHM in Austria for a month. In January last year, we went through another 5 prototyping cycles to produce something that met the regulatory criteria for a class 1 device that they could manufacture. And since then, I've continued working with their designers, and we've now locked the design and we've ordered the tooling for mass production. The other really key part of this is having a clinical trial that now has ethical approval and is all set to run next month, and is going to be done at James Cook University Hospital. And the chap in this picture here is my business partner and the regional lead for cochlear implantation. He's going to be the CI, Chief Investigator, for this trial that we'll both be running at James Cook. And he's just demonstrating there the earplugs that we have to use to generate conductive hearing loss for the participants in the trial. We'll be testing it on 20 people to show that it generates meaningful hearing improvement. I think the key point is the benefit of this, and the 2 big groups that I'm most interested in, and there are lots of other patients with conductive hearing loss from other causes for who this will be relevant, but the big groups in the UK are kids with glue ear who currently wait months and months for a grommet, which is a little plastic tube you put through the eardrum to ventilate it and address that fluid accumulation issue. And we know that they wait for a long time while they're developing their language and speech and early educational milestones, which does hold them back. And actually, when the grommets go in, there's evidence that they're not actually terribly effective, and neither are regular hearing aids. So we need a better hearing solution for these children. And it's a very common problem. Persistent glue ear is about 5% of kids. So there should be 1 or 2 kids in every primary school early years classroom who would benefit from this sort of technology. And then globally, the chronic ear disease, which is really the bread and butter of my clinical practice, is actually much more common in poorer countries. And the majority of people who get chronic ear disease in the poor countries will never get their hearing back. They'll always have a conductive hearing loss. They can't wear a hearing aid because of infections and discharge from the ears. So having a bone conduction solution that provides an inexpensive access to this type of hearing is potentially transformative for millions of people globally. and we're working with the team in Southampton who have a large amount of grant funding to do research and looking at using this platform in Malawi in the first instance. So what comes next? Really, I hope that this is going to become a very high volume, low cost intervention that is available to kids with clear ear when they have bad hearing loss for 3, 6, 9, 12 months of their childhood to get them through that period, and it will be globally relevant for people with conductive hearing loss in the poorest countries. And I think economies of scale is really important to that. And just to show that it will stay on a child's ear, hopefully this video, where this is Arthur on the trampoline, aged, I think it just turned 6 when we did this, showing that you can wear a bone conduction aid with a secure sound device bouncing around, and it's beautifully retained on his ear there. The next thing I want to talk about is work I've been doing in collaboration with the University of Cumbria and has been funded by PERS grant money, and it's related to the surgery that I do sort of week in, week out for a problem called cholesteatoma. Now, cholesteatoma is where you have accumulation of basically unhealthy skin that is infected and trapped behind the eardrum. And behind the eardrum, in a space not much bigger than a peanut, there is a lot of very important clockwork. There's the hearing bones, there's the inner ear hearing and balance organ, there's the brain case, there's the nerve that's moving your face, and there's some really major blood vessels as well. And to get this disease out, and it's a horrible disease that causes nasty complications, damages people's hearing, and have a constant smelly ear discharge, you have to drill away any bony overhangs and often drill sub-millimeter distances from these important structures. And for a lot of doctors, I think sometimes for surgeons in complex revision cases, and certainly when you're explaining these operations to patients, I think it's a black box area of the body. It's so complicated and convoluted. Even when you're showing patients their scans, it doesn't always help them to conceptualize the space very well. And when I plan these operations, I look at that picture, like that image on that left there. It's a black and white CT image. And what we're really looking at here is if we generate patient specific, so based on the scans patients are having, 3D printed models that are crystal clear. And actually, we're doing them better than that photograph now. Are crystal clear. We print the bone out so it's clear, and then the important anatomical structures that we're trying not to damage, like the brain and the big blood vessels and the nerves, are printed and highlighted really in different colours. We want to know, does that help patients understand the operation we're going to do when we show them their own anatomy like that? Does it help surgeons perform these operations more effectively and more safely? And these are the questions we're really asking with this project. And it was inspired by work I did with my first ever trainee when I became a consultant, a guy called Peter Sudworth, who he started 3D printing from the CT scans of patients we're going to operate on. Initially was doing it to practice the procedure so he could improve his learning curve doing the operations. And this one that's in the picture in the middle of the page here is a complex revision case. I wouldn't have let a trainee do that one actually, but he'd practiced on it nonetheless. And then he bought me the models, and we sat in the coffee room before looking at these models before we did the operation. And then doing the operation was just a transformed experience, because instead of having looked at the CT, which gives you a sort of floor plan idea of the area you're working on, you've actually been in the room before. It was a real sense of familiarity with the bony anatomy and where the critical structures were located. And I felt I was able to do that operation much more confidently. So we've designed a trial in which we're going to print these bones. We're going to show them to the patients we're operating on and ask them if they find them helpful to help them understand the procedure they're getting and the implications of it. And we're going to get surgeons to perform the operations on the printed bones, having had access to a lovely clear model. They'll operate on one which is bone coloured, but they'll have access to a lovely clear model first, or just the scan. And we're going to see if that makes a difference to their performance, both in terms of what the bone's like after they drilled it, how well they've done. And you can see there's Peter drilling out a printed temporal bone with an accelerometer on the drill, which has been fascinating, because we find that when the experienced surgeons do this, they make about half as many movements as the trainees. So it's almost like sports science, the economy of movement improves with level of training. And I'm really looking forward to finding out if these models also improve economy of movement and improve quality of operating that surgeons are doing. You can see 3 of my colleagues there looking very excited and nerdy about these bits we'd printed out and the accelerometers we were using. I just want to make a few acknowledgements for some PIs that have been involved in this work. So the British Society of Otology and British Association of Paediatric Otolaryngology, which are both part of ENT UK, provided really generous grant funding for the Secure Sun project, and Pairs Cumbria have provided grant funding for the temporal bone printing project. And we've been working with Tim Donovan, who's a academic at University of Cumbria, who's really been central to, getting us through this and working with us on the trial protocol and how we're going to do all this work. He's got an amazing expertise in this. And these companies, BHM and Medel, are bone conduction device companies that we're working with and have a licensing agreement with. And Oticon Medical also provided bone conduction processes for the early prototyping for free, and Strikers providing us with drills for the temporal bone project. So these are really my concluding comments. I think really with design innovation and any sort of research, failure is not fatal. It's about learning from the process and from the mistakes that you make, or perhaps even wrong to call them mistakes, but these sort of false starts teach us a huge amount about the processes involved. And I think clinicians have a unique insight into health problems, and just as engineers have a unique insight in design. And I think with design skills, clinicians can contribute in a really meaningful way to designing fantastic solutions for the problems that we are used to treating. And I would really like to see this becoming a huge strength in Cumbria. And I've put this picture up of Georgia in the middle there with me and Paul, one of my consultant colleagues, who won the Best Research Presentation Prize at the recent Ascent Cumbria Research Symposium for work she's done on a endoscopic ear surgery simulation platform that actually monitors surgeons' performance as they do it by using sort of contact measuring technology that's built into it. And I think, again, that could transform the way ear surgery training is done. And we're very proud to have been able to deliver these sorts of technologies from Cumbria, and hope to continue to do this. I'll put a little plug out for Ascent Cumbria as well, which has been running 2 years in a row. I think we're going to need to find about £30,000 of funding to run it again, and it brings, this is Jim Mackey, but it's bringing national figures in to Cumbria to talk about the research, hopefully more and more about the research we're doing in Cumbria. So if anyone's got any ideas of how we can find £30,000 to get things booked for next year, that would be very helpful. And that's it. Thank you.
Harry, thank you very much indeed. That was enlightening and really enjoyable and clear. Thank you. I'm going to move straight on to welcoming our next speaker, Professor Rylie Green, who is both a professor of bioengineering and head of the Department of Bioengineering at Imperial College, London. She's had a very long career in really bioelectronics, working in regenerative medicine and turning ideas into technologies. And Rylie, thank you so much for coming to talk to us this afternoon. Over to you.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. I presume we can all see the slides now. So what I wanted to talk to you about is actually, it connects quite nicely with what Harry's just talked about, which is actually how we can use the electronic side of the body to improve treatment of patients, and some of the things that we're trying to do as engineers to try and bring new tools to that treatment. And so bioelectronics in particular is very descriptive of a very wide field of devices. So one of the spaces where I've worked quite heavily is in bionic eye, but also in cochlear ear, bionic ear implants as well. But indeed, the technologies that we work on are applicable not just to those organs, but also to a wide variety of tissues that have electrical signals. So heart, brain, nerves, and muscles. And there is a lot of treatments and diagnostics and monitoring that uses the inherent electrical signals of the body to understand sort of what's going on, and then also to modulate. So the field of bioelectronics, where I've worked quite extensively, has really been about that interface between the engineering and the medicine, but very much also working with sort of the biology and the cells that are present and sort of whatever underlying condition there is going on as well. So many of you may be familiar with some of our most prolific bionics that are out there. The cardiac pacemaker is one that came about. It was developed in sort of the 50s and 60s, came to the market in the 70s, and is a device that's returned an incredibly large number of years, I think, to the life of patients who suffer from cardiac issues. And from then, there was the cochlear implant. So this is a three-part system there that obviously there's an implantable component and a wearable component. But effectively, one of the things that keeps coming up as we move through these devices that are already out there is that they're all basically the same device, just with slightly different formats. So our cardiac pacemaker has sort of 2 electrodes there that go into the wall of the heart. The cochlear implant's a bit more exciting. It's got 22 electrodes, and what this means is there's sort of 22 spots where you can actually interact with the nerves. There's also this device, which is a deep brain stimulator, which is effectively the same sort of format that goes down deep into the brain and is used to control aberrant behavior of the cortical tissues within the brain for the treatment of things like Parkinson's and tremor. The next device there is is a peripheral nerve stimulator, which is often used in things like peripheral nerve pain. And when you look at these, they all look very similar. There's this single unit that is the pulse generator that's buried somewhere far away from the actual site of the problem. And then there's these electrodes that go down and basically are used for monitoring what's going on with the neural tissue, but then also stimulating to control whatever condition is happening. And they use the same sort of building blocks. They use the same sort of stimulation, and every one of them is made from the same materials. And materials is the area where my work in particular has been looking at how we can change this field. This field is great, it's amazing, but it's a field that hasn't changed in about the last 50 years since they came to the market. One of the slightly more exciting devices that's come about is this little one in the middle, and by looking at it, you can tell this one's distinctly different, and this is a wireless pacemaker, which is used for heart pacing, but effectively still does use the same technologies. They've just been miniaturized. And that's something that's happened that we're really in the area of engineering has been a good way of improving technologies is by miniaturizing all the electronics. We've made devices smaller, making them less dangerous to implant in patients, and meaning that we can, start to really do better around the sorts of things that we are returning to patients. So one of the areas that I've worked in bionic ear and in bionic eye, we use a very small number of contact sites or electrode stimulators to return what is really a very rich piece of sensory information. So whether that is hearing or sight, you go from millions of cells down to sort of 10, 20, 30 electrodes to try and return that sensation to a patient. In looking at what the fundamental limitations are, we can actually start to change what that is to build up towards high resolution devices that might be closer to what the actual natural system can provide. So I'm going to briefly show you why this problem has prevailed for so long. One of the issues is that we started out and basically engineers with doctors came together to make things like bionic eyes and cochlear implants. And we did this using metals because at the time in the 1950s, metals were the only thing that we thought could talk very well to the body because they passed electricity. But metals talk in electrons, so they pass electricity the same way that electricity passes through, the wires in your house. But that is not how cells that are electroactive actually talk. Cells that are electroactive use ions, which flux in and out of the fluid that's inside your body to move that electricity. So what this means is every time we are trying to record what's happening or stimulate to change a disease behavior, we are having to go from one system to another system, and that is actually quite a slow and inefficient process. If we try and push the current further and faster, we end up creating chemical reactions that can damage the tissue or damage the device. So I have a little a little plot over here on the side, which is this is a bionic eye device up here on the in the right-hand side. And the circles there, the grey circles, show you how much electricity it's required to activate sight in a patient to get them to see a single spot of light. But this little grey line below that, the grey line below that with the diamonds, actually shows you how much electricity you can push through a platinum electrode before it starts to have these chemical reactions that can actually cause damage to the cells or to the device. So there's a lot of patients that can't receive this technology because you simply can't push enough electricity through it and still keep them safe. The second limitation we have is that metals are inorganic. So your body instantly recognizes that's not part of me. It's stiff, it's hard, and as you can see in the little video off to the left there, all of your tissues are constantly moving. So you have this soft, squishy tissue that's pushing up against these hard, stiff devices. And over time, what happens is your body tries to wall that off and get rid of that thing that is stiff and hard, and instead wraps it around in a tissue that's effectively the same as scar tissue. So the sorts of scars that you get when you cut yourself, it's very similar, except this is happening inside your brain or on your nerves or heart tissues. So what we've sought to do is try and address both of these problems. Is there a way in which we can design materials and systems that naturally talk in the same language as the cells? And is there a way in which we can tune them so that they are soft and squishy and move with the body as it naturally moves? And yes, the answer is there are a number of material systems that exist. We didn't have to go very far to design them. A lot of them inherently just exist, which talk in ions and electrons. So it can talk to metals, which is important because you have to talk to electronics, but also talk to the cells. Are there materials, and in the field of plastics or polymers, including gels, hydrogels, there's lots of materials that we can choose to tune and match the mechanical properties of the tissue so that we have squishy, stretchable materials. But importantly, there's also a lot of extra functionality we can get by looking to the field of organic materials and plastics. So organic materials now are used prolifically in research, and we're trying to figure out the best ways in which we can apply them to devices using either these. There are materials called conductive polymers, which naturally are conductive materials that can move charge. There's also, many people would be familiar with graphene and carbon technologies, which conduct electricity. They're organic. Unfortunately, they don't talk in the ion language of cells. They just talk with electrons, but they're very good conductors, and they're organic, so the body is very accepting of them. And the last one is cell-based interfaces. So there's also, in the field of tissue engineering and regenerative medicine, there's lots of uses of cells whereby you can use things like stem cell technologies to replace cells that aren't behaving correctly. That's a big fields involved in each of those three sort of areas. But today I just want to take you through one material technology that we've been working on and how we've been working with clinicians to design them so that they're fit for purpose for patients, so that hopefully we can bring them to the clinic in a relatively short time. So one of these materials that we've been working on is something we call a conductive elastomer. And that's where we use a conductive polymer. So this is one of those materials that naturally moves both electrical charge and ionic charge. So it can move that signal between the electronics and the body very easily. And we've combined it with an elastomer material. So that's like a rubber-like material. We're using polyurethane, which is used extensively in things like breast implants, in catheter lines, in pacemaker insulation. So we know these are quite safe materials, and you need both of these materials because our conductive polymer material actually can be quite stiff on its own. We can't tune its mechanical properties very well. So we use the other material to combine with it to tune those mechanics and give us both the ability to communicate very well electrically, but also have that soft, stretchable type behavior that we want so that the whole device can move with the body. So one of the areas that I wanted to focus on is the use of these materials in creating connections for amputees. So when people actually have limb loss, there is this place at the end of the limb where we've had to cut a lot of nerves. And if you don't do anything with the end of those nerves, that often leads to something called neuroma. Now, neuroma is where the nerve tissue sort of wraps around itself and is thought to be the source of lots of phantom limb sensation as well as pain at the end of an amputation. Now, we've been working with a number of surgeons there. Over on the side. The top person on the photos was my PhD student, but the three below that are all people working in clinical space and as surgeons. And they found out that if you take a little bit of leftover muscle tissue, either from the amputation or just from a graft site, and wrap it around that nerve, you give the nerve something to grow into. And when it does that, you stop neuroma from forming and you stop this phantom limb pain from happening. Consequently, they also realized that this would be a really nice way of creating a communication with the leftover limb. So the question became, can we design a device that can read the intent of the patient to move the missing limb and use that to control a robotic prosthetic? And can you then subsequently feed that information from the prosthetic back into the limb and return a sense of sensation and feeling to the patient, so that they can then control things like the pressure with which they grasp, whether they're, feeling sort of, heat, temperature, pain. All those things are really good sensations that when you've lost a limb, having that return to you can really help you with your quality of life. So to do that, we designed, and so we've got an image there from an implant. We've designed this electrode array with the clinicians. Really, the critical point here is we never could have, as engineers, designed this on our own, because as engineers, we didn't know the requirements of the tissue. So we had to work with the surgeons who said, and this is why it's such an interesting shape of a device, this is a device that has a very open mesh structure, and when you stretch it out, there's lots of space. Now, that space was critical to making sure that the tissue we wrapped it around stayed alive, that it could get blood vessels into it, and that it could access all the nutrients it needs to grow and survive. But because the nerve then healthily grows in, and we've done our studies that show the nerve grows in and spreads out amongst this tissue, we've then shown that also we can get those signals out of the implant, out of the tissue, and push them back in. So this graph here shows that we are recording the actual intent. We stimulate the nerve further up and record down on this little interface, and we can record the intent of the muscle groups that have been that used to be innervated by this nerve. And then also we can recruit both nerve and muscle by stimulating back through this same device, showing us that we have the potential there to return sensation as well. So this is just one area where none of this would have happened without collaboration with surgeons. When we first designed these devices, we didn't have good preservation of the tissue, and we needed the surgeons to say, no, you need to remove more here. You need to wrap it in this way. This first device was designed for preclinical studies. These are with animal models. And now we're at the point where we're now redesigning those with the clinicians for human-sized devices with human patients, so that we can make sure that we are putting this in line with a surgical protocol as well. Another area that we've been working on quite extensively, and this is where I have some startup activity, is in EEG. So these exact same materials I just described don't have to be implanted. They can also be worn on the body and simply, get the signal that needs to be understood for diagnosis. In this particular one, we've been working with the Great Ormond Street Hospital and the neonatologist there, because normally when you have a baby that you suspect of seizing in the ICU, if you don't have a technical team available, so if they're not seizing on Monday to Friday 9 to 5, then you usually have to make a decision to treat them with anti-seizure medications without a confirmed diagnosis, which can lead to some long-term implications for the babies that can be quite negative. What we designed was, with the clinicians, this same open mesh structure you saw on the other device now can be applied by simply popping this device on the baby's head. You can see the photo of the back of the baby's head there that we've been using in some of our studies. And this means that anybody within the clinic, a parent, a nurse, a doctor, can simply pop this on and end up with the electrodes in the right spot on the skull to get a good EEG confirmed within the hour very quickly and make an informed decision. Just a little bit of data there that shows these electrodes and these material systems and the way that they pull the signal in and out are just as effective. The green and the blue signals on the top of that graph show you the normal wet electrode response compared to our dry electrode response, and you're getting the same biosignal. And the one underneath that is just a confirmation that you get differential signal when you're doing different sorts of things with your brain. So this is a simple eyes closed, eyes open, and it detects obviously when the change in frequency happens when you change the signal that your brain is getting related to that action. So that's one area that we're really pushing quite strongly with the NHS, and we have an NIHR grant to try and get this into the clinic very quickly because it's a new material. You have to be very cautious about making sure it's safe before you apply it to people. But because it's a wearable and can be removed quickly and changed depending on how that goes within the clinic, it's a very nice, safe way of getting these new materials into clinical practice. So the last thing that I wanted to show you was, because these materials are polymeric, because they are different to normal traditional metallic materials, they also have more function. So it's actually quite well known that polymer systems can be used to deliver drugs as well. And now we're trying to combine drug delivery aspects with the electrical aspects to deliver drugs to places where normally we wouldn't be able to. And again, in this one at the bottom there, Ryan Matthews from Leeds is a surgeon who does a lot of work in glioblastoma, which is a very low survival rate brain tumor. Has been working with us to design this device to put down into a biopsy needle. You apply your electrical stimulation, and what it actually does is offload a drug payload directly into the tumor. So this is a way of doing localized chemotherapy. And we've shown in mouse models that what we can do there is pop this device down into the brain and offload directly into the tumor. Pushing the drug pushes it further and deeper so that you can get this deeper into the tumor tissues and hopefully give a really good kickstart to the treatment of that patient at the outset. Now, this one's a really tricky one because you're talking about, and you really need surgeons on board to help you understand how we could actually access that during a biopsy. You need to confirm what the tumor is. You need this to be still within an anesthetic time frame. And so we're working very closely with a number of different surgeons now as we widen this up to figure out, how we can actually make this happen within a treatment protocol. As well as also looking at glioma now, which is a childhood cancer, is particularly important because when you normally treat children for glioma, you're having to give them chemotherapeutic drugs that make their entire body very sick. But they're still developing reproduction organs and things like that very much can be affected by these systemic chemotherapies. So if we could contain that just to the site of the tumor and hopefully treat them without that many side effects, then we think that this is a really promising technology that we're working with. So why does this matter? I think it really matters because your clinical impact it's more than just a device. I can't just make up what a device needs to be and push it out there and hope someone will use it. We're hoping to make devices that, improve patient compliance, that lead to earlier diagnosis and treatment, but also are the right treatments for that patient, ultimately resulting in, reduced hospital burden, improved quality of life. Definitely has to be in partnership with medicine. It can't be engineers alone. So clinicians do shape whether technologies help patients. Engineers very much need to work with, at real clinical problems. We have a habit, I think, sometimes of reading journal papers and coming up with problems, but unless we're there working with the clinical staff and indeed the patients, because we have to understand what the patient requirements are as well, then we can't actually create impact. So translation really does require this big collaboration between medicine, between engineering, We also need industry partners and regulatory authorities on board, but that's probably a different talk for a different time. And that's basically it for me. Bioelectronics it's not about replacing medicine. It's very much about giving a new tool set, a new way to communicate with the body, so that we can actually do really informed treatments using the best technologies that we have, rather than, trying to backfit old technologies that haven't moved in sort of the last, 50 years or more. So massive thank you to my group. I have an extensive group here at Imperial that do a much wider range of projects than the few little windows you've just seen there. And also a big thank you to collaborators across the world, across the UK, and the funders as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Rylie. That was terrific. It's my job to thank both of our speakers, Harry Tustin, Consultant ENT Surgeon NCIC, and Professor Rylie Green, Head of Department of Bioengineering at Imperial. Brilliant talks. Thank you to the audience for such interesting questions and for coming along, including, I can see, colleagues from Scotland for the first time who've been joining the webinar, so welcome. And once again, thank you, all of you, speakers and audience, for attending today. Bye-bye.